fine, that's acceptable, but for me it was like really the writing on the wall, because it was like, this is so much bullshit, and it was kind of the evidence for how man does create God, because there is this void in which, you know, you experience a certain amount of pain, and if you're not prepared for it in other ways, you have to kind of find ways to adjust, and this was her way of adjusting to all of that and dealing with all of that. But for me, it was just more evidence against it, because I know my mother can't. I mean, it's like, I'm sorry, Mom. I hope you don't watch this video and hate me forever. But like, I called her the other day. Her husband recently had some surgery, and I wanted to check up on him and see how he was doing. This is a new husband. Right.
He should stay away from helicopters.
Not the dead one. Well, I was going to be a pilot, and after the second family members died to helicopter stuff, I was like, I'm gonna not so much with the piloting, you know. But she, I called her, and she didn't recognize my voice, which I find hilarious. But so like for like 3 minutes, I'm teasing her because she doesn't know who this is, and I'm finally like, you know, it's your son, and she's like, oh, and then she goes, oh, that's so amazing. You know, I was just thinking about the fact that you hadn't called me for a while this morning, and as soon as I think it, you call me. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't recognize your son's voice. Like, you're supposed to be a clairvoyant, and you were supposed to have this like epiphany that I was going to call you today, but then when I call, you have no idea who I am.
But it's also, I think that's a good example of the like a false positive when you say, I was just thinking about you, that you hadn't called me in a while, and then you called me. But it's like, think of all the times that she's thought that and you didn't call her. Right, exactly. But she discounted all those times, and now the one time, you know, that was the one that mattered, basically.
And that's how very much she is in reinforcing that. And I think that's why she's kind of gone a New Age direction, because basically, or the other reason I think she went spiritual instead of religious is because she gets to define the rules. And she's like me, she doesn't like rules put on her, and religion is very good about putting rules on you. And this is her way of stepping out of that. And, you know, so that was just another one of the telltale signs. But the other side of my atheism that I find interesting is that, like I said, my stepfather and my a whole bunch of brothers on my stepfather's side were all atheists, and my dad was atheist. But they never talked about it. And that's actually part of what I'm doing here, is the fact that sometimes you need to talk about it in order to get that last little push and let the cogs in your brain kind of fall into place and identify with where you really stand. Because there's a lot of things now that I'm atheist that I talk to my dad about that I'm like, if he had even tried to mention this stuff when I was 14, I could have been here a lot sooner. You know, and it's interesting too, because a lot of people say, you know, well, atheism and everything is kind of this path to nowhere where you get no comfort, or you get none of this, and so on and so forth. Like I told you, my brothers, I mean, they're dead, they're gone, I don't have to worry about it. You know, that's just the way it is.
You don't have to worry that they're suffering forever.
That's what I was going to say. I actually, when I finally turned that page to atheism, I was more comforted about my brothers being dead, because I suddenly had this realization that I didn't have to debate, are they burning in hell eternal? Are they burning in Muslim hell? Or are they burning in Catholic hell? Are they just not burning in the outer darkness of the LDS religion? I had this realization that, you know what, they're just gone. It's tragedy. But it helped me understand that I can move on, and it helped me learn that this is the life I have. That I have to make the most of this life, and I have to enjoy it for what it's worth, because there isn't this magical playland after where everything's going to be okay. You know, and I know that can be more cold and unsatisfying for others to think that their loved ones are just gone. But it to me, it's a lot better to recognize that this is what you have. Like, if you make mistakes, you're going to have to make up for them, because you're not going to have time to do it later. If you hurt someone, you're going to have to apologize, because it's not going to be all better later. You have to address things in the now. And that was a big thing for me. Sorry, I diverted a little bit there, but like I was saying about my dad being atheist and not saying anything, because he's a very honorable person, and he basically allowed the women in his life to raise the children in their way of thinking. And I think it came from some kind of thinking that that his beliefs were odd, and that because they were odd, they were somehow not valid.
Right.
And so his like time or chance to imprint his beliefs on the children, he felt was devalued essentially, and wouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched him do it with my stepbrother and sister afterward. He allowed his LDS wife to raise them in, the LDS church, which was complicated for them, I'm sure, because of the fact that I didn't go, and I was
Right.
clearly not any religion and things of that nature. I mean,
And
still
he didn't
agnostic.
go, probably, yeah.
He definitely did not go.
Right.
I mean, and the poor children, the problem with them was that they had to go.
Right.
And there was literally consequences to be suffered if they did not go.
And they
if
probably
did
didn't
not want to
understand
go.
why their father wasn't going.
Well, exactly.
They
And
didn't
I mean,
see
they
why.
had an idea, but there's somehow this dichotomy where they were forced to be like, well, that's just dad. And
Right.
I wonder how they dealt with the idea that he's gonna like be damned.
Yeah.
And
That was trouble for me trying to sort those
Yeah.
feelings out.
oh, I think everyone's. That's why I was so keen to ask you about
Mhm.
that last week. Because of the fact that, to me, every time you tell that story, or like when we've talked about it in the past, it always seems really troubling to me to see how much the idea of hell actually affected you. Because
Yeah.
it hasn't bothered me one iota for like the longest period of time, and so it's interesting for me to see how badly it can affect other people.
Yeah, it's. I know Richard Dawkins calls it child abuse, and it's. I mean, I can only speak from my own experience, but knowing that I'm not the only one who heard about this particular threat, I can imagine that it's ruined the peace of mind of a lot of children.
Mm-hmm.
To not even so much their thought that, oh, I'm going to suffer. I have the possibility that this place is where I'm destined to be. But in your case, I couldn't imagine what it must be like being a small child and thinking, my father,
Yeah.
the guy who cooks breakfast to me, takes me to school, whatever, like, he's going to suffer because he's not good enough. He doesn't have the membership in the right club.
Right.
I didn't think about my parents in that way when I was going through that, because they were church going.
Right. They're the same as you.
So, yeah.
Well, we've always had that in my family. A lot of dichotomy, I guess.
Mhm.
As far as the fact that we've had a variety of beliefs, and certainly being in the family. As I've watched my stepmother, raise her children in a kind of very zealous LDS way,
Mhm.
and watching them have to cope with that, it was really hard because of. I mean, she was very strict.
Mhm.
Like you don't remove your Sunday church clothes. Like you stay in your Sunday church clothes all day.
Why?
I have no idea. I don't know that reasoning.
Okay.
I don't think most people do that. I mean, most
Right.
people go to dress nice and look nice at the church, which was always something I loved about this one woman that would take me to Catholic church every now and then when I'd sleep over at a friend's house,
Mhm.
because she'd always let me just go in sweats and whatever.
Yeah.
Because she's like, God doesn't care what you look like,
Right.
and which I loved.
Right.
But I always stuck with me when I had to watch a lot of my Mormon friends just get all totally gussied up and out they go.
Right.
And I'm just like, God doesn't give a shit. Go naked. He doesn't care. But yeah, she did, and so they had the family home evening where they would read the scriptures and things like that, which just slayed me, because even then I wanted to just rail against how crazy the scriptures seemed to me.
Right.
The history of Joseph Smith and the history of the Book of Mormon, the archaeological evidence, the DNA evidence, just everything that does not make sense in that particular book. It was actually fascinating, because recently I talked to my other sister. She's very young. She's 10. No, she's 11. Excuse me. And
I have a lot of brothers and sisters.
different story, different day.
Yeah.
Luckily, a couple of them died, so the number is smaller. I
Oh.
have to track less of them. That's the sugarcoating of that. But she was just recently talking to us, because she knows me and my dad are atheists, and she was
Right.
out away from her mother, and so she was asking us kind of questions about that. And the thing that was fascinating about it was that she kind of went into, like, she doesn't really know what to believe anymore. She doesn't really believe the church is true. She's 11, and she's
Right.
really questioning it. Now, unfortunately, she's in the custody of her mother. They're divorced now.
Right.
And she's got 7 more beautiful years of church while having doubts, because she cannot decide until she's 18 to not go to church. Like, that's one of the requirements of her mother.
Do you know, is there a particular reason that she finds herself doubting? Is she hearing this stuff and it's just not making any sense to her?
Basically,
or is
yeah.
she, so it's not like she's getting, your father is obviously not taking her to a different church,
Yeah, no, her it seems like the logic of it is starting to catch up to her. And that's even how she put it, is she's like, it just doesn't make sense. Like, these certain ideas of like how Christ could do this or Christ could do that, and things of that nature, she just describes as not making sense. And now she's still young, and it's kind of fascinating to watch her logical gaps are still there, because I turned the question on her of like, well, if you don't really believe it, or if you think maybe God doesn't exist, like, well, think about, like, why do you believe in Santa Claus?
Right.
And she does.
Right.
And she sees gaps in it, and it's interesting to watch her address those gaps and have these, like, logical bridges where she's like, well, how does he get to every house, you know, in that amount of time? And how, how does he get down a chimney when there's no chimneys in most houses and apartments and things of that nature? And so you can see those logical synapses firing, and she's getting there.
Right.
And so I think that actually is what's causing most of her distress in church, is that she's questioning, and there's not good answers.
Right.
There's nothing solid to really say that God exists. Like, here's the evidence, and that's. I'm going to totally back up and change directions like I always do, which is why you're the host, because I ramble. With my whole agnostic viewpoint of this, like, not even God as an entity that sparked the Big Bang. It was now, later, it's so funny. I laugh at myself looking back on that, because all I realize is that it's all about labeling. And here I am saying, well, there's something magical, something that can't be explained, sparks the Big Bang.
Right.
And I'm just going to call it God.
Right.
Why? Well, just because I don't know what that thing is, or if the Big Bang was even sparked per se.
Right.
Why label it at all? And that's kind of where I feel, it's like, the religious are kind of at a disadvantage, because if they could prove God, then it would just prove whatever that thing exists.
Right.
It wouldn't necessarily be God.
It doesn't prove that it has an intelligence, or that it cares about us, or that it has any say or care of what happens to our souls after we die. It doesn't tell you anything like that.
Well, plus I think if you prove God exists as an entity, then suddenly it's not really God. It's just a different entity. It might as well just basically be qualified as like an alien or a very magical being. Is it still really the end-all, be-all creator of the universe that is the title we typically give God? And so, it's just, to me, I feel like no matter what you did to actually prove God, then you would just be proving that something else exists. Because it's like, if they prove ghosts exist, it would probably not be ghosts. It would be, we prove this other version of energy exists.
Right.
And whether or not it's us or some other, dimensional being or whatever, then that's what we would show.
Right.
None of that looks likely, but there you go. But I just, that's one of the things that I think is a terrible argument lately, is that a lot of, like Catholic lights that just don't go to church, but they kind of believe in God.
Right.
At the end of the day, if you get into an argument with them, they'll usually go back to that and be like, well, it's the thing that's driving evolution, or it's the thing that sparked the Big Bang.